All right. Everyone, thank you. It's going to be a lot of nonstop action. Brooklyn, welcome. New York's representing. I'm going to text Arlene and let her know that you guys are here. I'm going to take a sign sheet. That's the residency director, who's very nice. So we're going to talk a little bit about research and academic production. I think Stuart gave you a very high-level introduction to wilderness medicine, which, as you can see, wilderness kind of encompasses everything. And kind of what you make of it is what you make of it. And it's kind of the same thing when it comes to research in wilderness medicine. There's no one thing that is right. There's no one thing that kind of fits. It's whatever you want to do. But there's certain things you got to take in consideration as you go to your department chair or your residency director or your research director and going, hey, I want to go here and do X, Y, and Z. So some of the objectives, as you could read, we're going to discuss some of the unique challenges of wilderness medicine research, funding opportunities, and kind of publications, publication sources, and how this can tie into your academic production, which may not seem, some of you who are not faculty level at this point, a thing to worry about, but it will be pretty quickly as you guys finish up residency and med school and you get into that pathway. So obviously the first kind of unique challenge is research is environment. And you know, if you guys get an opportunity to talk to some of the faculty in the back, many of them have conducted research in some of the most austere conditions. But you have to just think about this as you're conducting hypoxia research. Yeah, you have to go someplace where people are hypoxic, right? So you have to think about logistics of getting yourself to high altitude and what sort of research and how you're going to conduct this. And, you know, there have been some great projects out there. I remember 1 year ago about an ophthalmologist in Italy doing hypoxia research. But he actually had to take equipment up into the Alps, which turned into like a really big challenge. So you have to think about funding for that. But maybe an alternative is you could do hypoxia research in the dive chamber. You know, things like that, or a hypoxia chamber, where you're not actually going to altitude, but you're bringing the hypoxia to you. IRB, you know, as you're talking about human subjects, a lot of these projects are going to involve human subjects. Is your, and I'm not labeling any state, is your IRB at your medical school in Kansas going to be relevant to you kind of having human subjects protection in Nepal? You have to think about translation, having those forms translated so people can read, informed consent, all this. So that can pose a challenge. So you really have to think about how you're going to do this. You might have to go to your ethics committee. You might have to go to your IRB and actually get into this discussion very early on before you even consider organizing a research project. Logistics, I keep using that word. That means all the stuff you need to conduct research, you got to take with you. That's going to be basically time, money, and effort. You have to think about a way to get those things there safely. And think about logistics on the way back. So you're doing research, you have human subjects, you have data, all that has to be protected somehow. So not only do you have to get things there, you got to keep basically your research findings safe, you have to keep people's identities safe, anything that you have, and you have to bring it back in a secured fashion so it's actually going and coming. Funding, this is always the challenge. We're going to talk a little bit later about funding sources. Where are you going to get money from this? For this. This is wilderness medicine. As I said, wilderness touches so many different areas in medicine, but nothing specific except for wilderness medicine. So, and as you kind of go through these meetings and you talk to more people and you mention wilderness medicine, there is certainly, just like many fields, there's a certain unconscious bias that comes in. There's a certain, I don't know what this is, so tell me more about it. But it may not fit into an area where you can find a funding bucket. So you have to think about what that might look like and go in pre-prepped and actually cast kind of a wide net when looking for monies. Manpower. It's great if you could find a way for yourself to get to the Amazon or to get to the Alps or to get to Nepal, but is you going to be just enough in order to kind of get your research completed? What other manpower do you anticipate having? How are you going to get those people there? How are you going to get them trained in a way that they need? So things to consider. Environment is always the key. We're talking about the wilderness, so I think that goes hand in hand. How do you keep all these things safe? Technology, and are you going to have technology needs? So this picture is actually, I think, from one of Stuart's projects, if I remember, and they kind of created a solar array to keep their ultrasound machines powered up. Is that right, Stuart? Right, so things like that to consider, or even if you have your solar array, if you're in really cold temperatures, your battery might not take a charge. So you might actually have the sun, but you got to think about ways to keep your batteries in your machines warmer. Charge just for you to conduct your research in the first place. And then, you know what, I should have put an asterisk on impact. Impact's always a funny thing. If you want to talk about strict academics, you know, you want your research to go into the biggest journals with the highest impact factor and to be cited again over and over and over again, and that's considered academic currency. But here's the thing, who is impact really for? It's for you. This is important for you, so wherever you put your research and you hope people can read it, I think is actually what the most impactful thing is. But if you're looking, depending on the culture of your department that you're in, the culture of your medical school, where they might be looking for kind of high impact journals only, it might continue to be a challenge with some of the types of projects that are available in wilderness medicine. So just some areas of interest, and like I said, the really beautiful thing about wilderness medicine is that this is a wide cast net. The field touches on so many different areas. You are kind of much like emergency medicine, where you are kind of uber generalists and resuscitationalists. You're taking those same skill sets into the wilderness, and you're using improvisation, and you're bringing so many different facets of so many different fields in order to take care of people, which gives you an opportunity to actually have a broad thought in kind of areas of interest. So this can range from like trauma and sports medicine and rescue and pre-hospital care and tropical and travel medicine. So it actually gives you a lot of flexibility in this regard as you're thinking about projects to do. You know, topic areas for wilderness medicine projects and funding. This was just adapted from the Wilderness Medical Society. But here, I mean, it can go a lot of ways. Surveys are a big deal, clinical investigations, even basic science, as we're talking about hypoxia and mitochondria, and you know, these sort of things. Public health is always big, particularly as we're getting into climate change and impact of human behavior on basically human health, injury prevention. You know, you think about things like drowning. We don't think much about this except for the summer, but drowning is declared by the WHO as a public health emergency worldwide. There's hundreds of thousands of people who die drowning every year, and we don't think about this, but this is an opportunity for you to go out and think about what sort of impact you can have in other areas. Disease tracking has become huge. As we're sitting here, and this is nothing political, but you know, we have measles kind of breaking out across the United States. But measles aside, disease tracking from other countries to here is used. So depending on what you can get into, and then obviously the new technology and humanitarian response, as we're thinking about impact tracking people. We have 3G, we have LTE at Everest Base Camp at this point. So the opportunity to exchange information in what were once remote environments has certainly become much easier to do. So you can think about how you can leverage technology in these, as we're talking about like telemedicine now, let's say, or kind of shared decision making as we're kind of tracking responses to humanitarian crisis situations. So the current state of research, you know, obviously environmental, again, Stuart touched upon this. I think the conversation that's coming up definitely in more academic circles is, you know, environmental and humans' impact on climate change, and then climate change's impact on human condition and human health. Disaster prep, we know along with, and this is, we're not trying to make this a talk about climate change, obviously, but as we know that weather patterns are going to get more severe and kind of more unpredictable, disaster preparedness is going to become much more important. Medical simulation, so before, I'm kind of aging here, I remember the first generation SimMan on a cart when I was a resident almost 20 years ago, but we're talking about bringing simulated care out into remote environments. So it's not unusual now to have, I know there was some talk about simulation, but if you really think about the education that is provided in wilderness medicine, it is really in situ field simulated education, whether it's in scenarios that are created and checklists, or whether you're going to improv. There's a lot of moulaging. There are a lot of things that go in where it actually makes it a really robust and unique environment for simulated type education and research on there. And then obviously extreme environments in human physiology. So as people are kind of pushing the boundaries of activities and are racing the planet or doing 100+ mile races, there's a lot of research that comes with these. So whatever your area of interest is, which is really nice, is I think you find a spot for it in wilderness medicine. So let's talk about grants a little bit. Again, grants are a little bit tough to come by. Places to look, the one place that's really truly dedicated for wilderness level research is from the Wilderness Medical Society, which is a professional society. It's been around for over 30 years, probably closer to 40. Paul Auerbach, we all kind of know that textbook, was one of the founding fathers. But every year there are research grants. These are not huge grants. I mean, you are not, as faculty, buying down time with this. But this is seed money. This is money that allows you to get to where you go and kind of fund some of your expenses. The nice thing about these grants, I'm just disclosure, I'm on the grants committee for this. I used to be the research council chair years ago for the WMS, is that you can actually use this grant money to cover travel costs, which with a lot of grants you cannot. So it's actually very helpful despite the not robust amounts. But show of hands, medical students? All right, you guys should be putting in grants every single year. I mean, there are several years where the student grants go unfunded because there just are not a lot of grants that are put in. And they're not going to give out a grant if it's not quality research. So if you are a student and you have an interest, in this room, find a mentor. The guy in the orange shirt's always good. He's a sucker for that. But if you have an idea, even if it's not at your institution, if there's somebody that can't fit, you can usually find someone who's at least willing to go over an IRB with you and talk to you. But submit, I mean, $5,000 grant as a student is a lot of money. It's also impactful as you're applying for residencies and fellowships as you go down. This grant, like I said, often goes unfunded because there are not a ton of people that go in. And conversely, if you're a faculty or a resident, find a nice medical student that you like. Make them primary, so use that on the back end. Research and training grant is for residents and fellows. And I got to say, in general, this is probably the most competitive one to get just because of sheer volume. Residents put in and fellows, and it's not necessarily even clinicians. You might have some other people who like postdocs and things like that who are PhDs who are putting in for this grant as well. So it makes this more competitive. Doesn't mean that you're not going to get it. I'm not discouraging you not from applying, but just going in knowing that this is going to be a highly competitive area for $5,000. The Hultgren grant is for $10,000. That's for any WMS member. So here's the thing: if you put in and you're a student, your primary bucket might be one grant, but you will be considered for others if you actually have a high level impact. You'll never get 2 grants, but if you kind of fit multiple categories, you can be considered for those categories. And the newer one, this is a few years old now. There's a Young Investigator grant. And this is going to be for people who are less than 5 years out from training or who are even still in training. And this is more of a kind of professional development grant. This is for the people who know that they're going to dedicate their lives to some aspect of wilderness medicine who will be impactful in the field, and that's for $10,000. And then there's a WMS Adventure Travel Grant. This does not really get funded very often because it's very specific parameters. If you look on the WMS website, they have a lot of CME programs. So what they would like is for someone to go on these CME programs and develop some research to be conducted during the course of their CME programs. So that's another area of opportunity that if you have foresight, you look to see what the year looks like, that you can develop something that will fit into one of the programs. So that often goes unfunded. So here's opportunity for you right here at any level. Other areas of funding, this was Stanford had this on their website a few years ago, but other areas too, and you really have to look through. I mean, a lot of times your medical schools, if you're a student, they have grants for you for research, and they're sitting there and they're untapped. Even residents, you might have GME grants in your institution. You could talk to your chair, see if there's any opportunity for seed money for a project. It won't be much, but areas of opportunity exist, but also funding from the American Alpine Club, a lot of altitude societies. The government's a big source. where it's contracted grants, because they're looking for opportunities for soldiers a lot of the time, particularly with Department of Defense, to operate better at high altitude or in adverse conditions. Stuart, I don't see him sitting there, he has this great story of, one is he's older than he looks, but he actually saw an ad for a grant in the back, in the back of a journal. And he kind of sent in a submission. I think he was a student at the time, and got a lot of money for a grant. So there money's out there. You just have to kind of look and see. But I think the easiest way to look is look for local funding. I'm not joking. I mean, you go look in your med school to see if there are funding opportunities for students. Look in your hospital if you're at a big university, because even sometimes the medical staff societies often have monies for grants, depending on where you are. It's pretty crazy, but there are often volunteer organizations within your hospital that have luncheons and they collect money and they give grants. We've gotten ultrasound machines from these rather than going through our traditional pathways. So look under every look in every nook and cranny, look under every rock. There might be some funding for you. And types of research, again, broadcast net. There's nothing that is kind of distinct for wilderness medicine type research. But if you look, ibuprofen for prevention of acute mountain sickness, frostbite treatment, even simple things like, if you're an athlete, paper tape for prevention of foot blisters in ultramarathoners. A foot blister can prevent you from finishing a race. But something as simple as using paper tape in lieu of, a gauze, and that's better to reduce your coefficient of friction with your skin against the shoe. That's really impactful for something that's so basic. And you could do that sort of research at one race, if you think about it. Somehow, optic nerve sheath diameters in acute mountain sickness. I guess we're not using that term anymore, but that's ultrasound research. And, prevention of headaches. So there's so much that can be done. And I think one of our opportunities here is, we are really kind of maturing now. I mean, a nice full room here is, what is our research agenda for emergency medicine and wilderness medicine if we look at this as a subspecialty of emergency medicine? And I think there's an opportunity for a mission and a vision. But again, because the subspecialty is so broad, that the opportunities, I think, are really wide. We just have to think about how do we organize this and catalog this a little bit more so we all know what's going on. Multi-site collaborations, we talked about funding, we talked about manpower, we talked about IRBs, we talked about logistics, security. Maybe that can be overcome if, we have 19 fellowship sites now. Maybe some of these fellowship sites actually merge up, and rather than sending individual people to remote clinics and things, maybe you send 3 people from 3 different sites at the same time to have a more broad-based appeal or manpower to get a meaningful project done. So research publications too, there's some of the challenges, but what are our journals that are going to publish wilderness medicine research? We in SAEM, I think, have come a long way in the past few years. If you look now, there's a wilderness session. If you want to put in your abstracts that are related for oral presentations or for e-posters, we have it now. We didn't have this 5 years ago. So this is certainly spreading. In the past, we'd have to fit our wilderness projects into a different corner. It'd be like, oh, okay, well, this is sports medicine, this is disaster, this is pre-hospital, but now we have a place. So this is certainly maturing. So I think we have the opportunity to see this, and then maybe look for some new sources of funding to grow this area. Okay, that is it for me.
I just thought I'd share a story, a short story, because your talk reminded me. That's how my academic career got started when I was a resident. I did my research project on a randomized trial giving pseudoephedrine to prevent middle ear squeeze in scuba diving. And that was my first project ever back in the late 80s, and then I took it was like, oh, it showed the difference
And that's a good point. Just in terms of funding too, we look for under cranny. I didn't really delve into this much, but there's industry opportunity as well. You know, as you're talking about like avalanche and Avalon and things like that to prevent hypoxia in avalanches. This might be Black Diamond who's willing to fund research for you. You know, the other areas of opportunity is also crowdsourcing now. You know, if we want to be modern, there are crowdfunding opportunities. If you need a quick $2,000 to go do a research project, there are crowdfunding websites out there specifically for science funding. It's failing me now. Henderson, do you remember which one that was? Yeah. Yeah, there's crowdsourcing is another opportunity for you. I mean, he didn't get much funding for beer as a post-race recovery solution. I mean, I actually sent money in, but I may have been the only one. So, but those are two areas as well. Okay, thank you very much.